All right. Hello. Welcome. It's me, Bill. And we're talking about audiobooks and why haven't I done audiobooks and why don't I use audiobooks myself? Rare exceptions. So here's the interesting thing. Um, Part of what the greatest value of reading is that you have to sit and and look at the words and then you have to process it. So one of the really interesting things about especially reading a physical book, let me see what happens if I do that. No, I don't think I want. Let's see. All right. One of the things about a physical book is you can touch it and then your eyes go and they see the words and then you have to form a thought based on the words and then you have to kick in your imagination in order to do that. And um, and so what it does, it leads to a couple of different great things that will help you process things much better. And one of them is that you will have to concentrate. Um, the second one is that you will have to use your imagination. And even in the case of where, say, you're reading a sports book on strategy and it has a diagram, I mean, you can look at the arrows and where they point, but you still have to imagine the real life scenario of a ball flying through the air. And what does that look like in real time? Um, and then not only that, but then you have to think through what is the meaning of this? And you may have some questions that are kind of go unanswered that you have to process. So part of the problem with audiobooks is that when people are consuming audiobooks, they are also largely engaged in other activities. Raise your hand if you sit quietly on the couch and listen to an audiobook with your eyes closed. Good for you, right? And then, but I think what we know is that people listen to audiobooks while they're driving, while they're engaged in other tasks. And so just by the virtue of that they're looking at something else, that they are engaged in another activity, there's a level of distraction there, and it doesn't give the think time. The other thing that I notice, this happens quite often, is that if I'm listening to an audio thing, and one thing I do like is Blinkist. The Blinkist app is actually pretty interesting because you can get a book summary in like 12 to 15 minutes. So basically the major points of the chapters are summarized and explained in broad strokes. And then that's how I select what I'm going to read next. Now my reading list is so long that I no longer subscribe to Blinkist. But, if I get high and dry on books to read, then I will go back to Blinkist. Is that the solution to my problem? Almost. All right. Okay, so let's see what happens if I do that. Maybe a little bit better. All right, so this is what you need. You need some think time, and part of what happens is that you need to create a mental map of what. For instance, I'm reading a biography of Martin Luther and some of the myths about Martin Luther's life. Right. And so it's like for years and years and years, for centuries, these things have been presumed to be true, but then the biography, dug much more deeply into it. And so now you have a new map, you have a new way of thinking about things. I think it's very interesting to read a biography of someone and then to realize that, hey, they're not the person you thought they were. Right. So, and studying history is the same way, because there are things that you're taught in school and then you dig a little deeper and then you realize, hey, it's different. And the same thing can be applied to a tennis court or any kind of sports training. I mean, there are lots of conventional wisdoms out there, things that people have said, for a long time, and have taught for a long time, and they are not necessarily true, or they're shade off. And with a little bit more thinking about those things, then you can create a different mental map. Now, part of what I want to apply this to is this new book that I have coming out called, it's not called anything yet, but it's about net play. And, if you're going into uncharted territory, then things are new for you. And then it can be quite difficult to feel lost at the net if you haven't been playing there. So part of what happens is you have to kind of build your map of the net, right? So, if the ball's here, you can move to it and hit it pretty well. But if it's coming at you, then you might have to slide away from it. That's a little bit of a different move. If the ball's getting past you, then you might even move diagonally backwards and kind of flip it that way, or even do a little drop shot. I mean, there's lots of little nuances to the map of the net. If somebody drops the ball really low, then you have a decision to make. Are you going to try to take it out of the air, or are you going to let it bounce and make it a half volley? So lots of little nuanced things that you need to learn to make a better map of the front court for yourself so that you can function there. When I was a kid, I was always really fascinated with ancient maps. So there'd be this drawing that someone had made because the ancient mariners had explored a coastline, and then they went to the map maker, and they were the map makers themselves, and they drew it how they felt like it was. And it was really interesting how pretty accurate it was, right? But then you put it next to a satellite image, and you start to see the little areas where they were wrong, where they perceived things differently. So updated map making is really a big deal. And so we also need to do that in our minds. We need an updated map of the world, an updated map of how we coach. The landscape of players has shifted because there's been generational shifts in how people consume information, and it's repeatable. It's been shown that the sequences in mindset from one generation to another are pretty predictable, in that this one leads to that one, leads to that one. And another thing that's very important, there are outliers. So technically, by birth, I fall into the so-called baby boomer generation. But in reality, that was awesome. In reality, I'm actually more of a Gen Xer. And so we were the ones who started thinking of, hey, there should be an Olympics of this and that. It's like there should be an Olympics of ski jumping, doing flips, and there should be like skateboard, that stuff. So, in decades later, then the X Games were born. And isn't that perfectly well named, right? But now, see, our maps of coaching have to change. So, I'm now in a different part of California, and the culture is here. It's different. My approach to people has to be different because the culture is different, and there are different values around here. So understanding that and plugging into that, and approaching people in a way that they want to be approached is very important. And part of that is by sitting and thinking. You need some think time. You need to reflect on things. So very, very important. Now, the new interesting discovery that's come up in neuroscience is that they figured out that there are different codes. And I don't understand this fully, but I'm going to explain it the best understanding I can give. But the neuroscientists have figured out that there are certain codes in your hippocampus that create either associative memory or predictive memory. So, and they figured out a mechanism by which to turn one or the other off, which is kind of a scary thought, that they can use a signal to disrupt that code from being put in there. So right here, if you look here, that right there is the hippocampus. This is where memories are stored. And what they discovered is that they found the actual mechanism, the actual code in the different parts of the hippocampus where memories are stored either as in like a map, mind mapping. So the example given was that if you knew a certain way to get somewhere, and then that there was construction on that road, your memory of alternate routes to get there would be what you would rely on to get to the place if your way was blocked. Right now, if we look at that in terms of playing a tennis match, then let's say it's a really windy, swirly day, and your toss is blowing all over the place, and it's going to be tough getting to the net because the ball's blowing all over. Net play is actually probably more disrupted by weird changeable wind than anything, right? So that then it changes your map of how you're going to win that day. So you would only come in if you really had to. And so that's one example, right? Another one would be, if one day you could be playing on a hot day with very lively balls. Certain kinds of tennis balls are more lively than others. Or you could be playing on a really damp day and cold, and the balls are heavier to begin with. And so it changes your map of how you're going to play, because when the balls are flying like in Indian Wells, then you probably have to be more aggressive. You have to be more accepting of the fact that you're going to make some errors that you didn't expect. But then if you go into heavy conditions and play with heavier balls, and just say like the Miami Open is one of the best examples, and that's what makes those two tournaments really tough to win back to back. It doesn't happen often that players win them back to back. It's actually been happening a little bit more often lately. Nadal and Djokovic have been the ones who've been winning it back to back more than the others. But it's really a tough transition to go from conditions where the ball flies and winners can just come flying off the racket, or balls 5 feet out all of a sudden, super heavy conditions where a player can make the game extremely physical with heavy topspin, and that's when it's a grinder's delight to be able to hit lots of heavy topspin and keep people under that pressure of being pushed back under the weight of the ball. So a different map of how you're going to need to win on a certain day. So then the other one would be the predictive. Okay, so now you have stored up in your mind, occurrences. So part of what happens is once you get enough experience, like especially playing the net, you start to be able to read tendencies from your opponent. And so you start to understand what they might do. And so, and I don't want to say anticipate, because I don't like the word anticipate, because once you start to anticipate, once the other player starts to realize that you're anticipating, then they'll try really hard to do something else to throw you off. So it's more about predictive, in that you position yourself for the thing that they're most likely to do, but you're also open-minded to be able to respond for when they do something counter to that. And the higher you go, the higher level you go, the more you will play against people who will do their best to get you to respond to what they're doing. They'll respond to what they're doing. Oh, let's see. I'm getting a comment here. Oh, that was about an hour ago. All right. And then they'll start to see, okay, you're starting to really anticipate and go towards that. And then they'll do something else. And then you're like, so a good example of that would be, they come to the net on an inside out approach shot, forehand to backhand, and come into volley. And then you start to see them in the middle of the court moving forward. So you start to move a little bit early, and then boop, they hit the drop shot to the opposite corner. And then you have to make a diagonal move, which is going to be, you're going to have to make a rounded move to get over there. And that's going to be really difficult. So then what it does, it causes you to hesitate and wait and watch. So very important to be able to wait and see what's happening and not anticipate. But yet, as soon as you do see that it is going to be that inside out, then to respond quickly and go. Right. So you got to think these things through a little bit. Now, I probably will start making audiobooks at some time, but I have another book coming out, and I just really want to encourage people to read, and if you can still do your audiobooks. In fact, I would say get an audiobook of a book that you've already read, and then what that can do is reinforce what you've read. But I don't think that you're getting full value out of an audiobook, especially if you are distracted while you're consuming it. And also you're not having kind of the sit and think time. So definitely it's a good idea to get a book and sit down and think through what you're going to do. Let me see what else I put on here, just so that I make sure that this is also for those of you who are coaches. It's always good to spend a little bit of time reflecting on what has happened that day on the court. So maybe you discover something about a player, like there's a certain cue that really works with them. Or you can reflect back and you can say, okay, I was doing this and it worked great. Or I was doing that and the player struggled. And let's see what's going to happen next. Maybe they're struggling, and then the next time they come out, they just do it because they had time to process. But maybe they continue to struggle. So I'll give you an example of that. I have a girl, Dima, that I'm working with, and she's been struggling to hit topspin. So we've been working again and again on, doing activities that help foster the topspin. And then we go back to live play, and we start to look at, is she producing topspin? And then when it stops and she seems to get into a rut of not hitting any topspin at all, or consecutive shots with no topspin, then we come back and we do those activities again. And so there's this progression and regression. And yesterday, she had a bit of a breakthrough where she was starting to hit more topspin more often. And then her friend, who also came, who didn't seem to be able to hit any, was actually behind in the hitting of topspin in the whole group, is actually now the best one. So, learning can sometimes be this process of progression and regression, and then giving players time to process, because there's a lot of the learning that will happen comes in between the lessons. And that's kind of an interesting thing to deal with and pay attention to. Sometimes if we feel like we as coaches are struggling in a lesson, then trusting and even setting the players up and saying, well, okay, today didn't look pretty, right? But I trust that between now and the next time I see you, that you're going to process this and it's going to go better next time. So anyway, so read books, please. And I've got one coming up, and I can't wait to share it with you. Thank you, and have a great day. Time for me to get on a webinar with somebody who's going to talk about Chat GPT and how it's going to revolutionize coaching. Yeah, whatever. Here we go.